All right. There we go. Hi, everybody. I'm Kyle Shelton, the Deputy Director of the Kinder Institute for Urban Research here in Houston. It's a real pleasure to be here today talking about investing in transportation and the future of transportation. This panel is presented by Texas Central, and as has been mentioned, the corporate sponsors underwrite this event and make it possible, so we're really appreciative of that, but they didn't plant any questions about the high-speed rail today, so they're all coming from my mind and the thoughts of our panelists here. And we're really excited to be joined by Sue Bauman, who is a member of the DART Board of Directors and the former chairwoman of the board, Sanjay Ram, a member of the Metro Houston Board of Directors, and Michael Morris, the Director of Transportation for the North Central Texas Council of Governments. Mayor Pro Tem Garza from Austin unfortunately fell ill this morning and isn't able to join us, but I think we will be able to fill this 45 minutes and then with really exciting conversation, and are looking forward to hearing questions from you all as well. So y'all, I wanted to start with sort of a bigger picture question that maybe each of you can answer. And thinking about your cities and your regions and agencies, what are you all talking about as sort of the future of transportation at this moment? And if you can think of maybe one or two key outcomes that you're looking to build towards and looking for in the future to see us address with transportation, what would those be? Sue, can maybe start with you? Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Hello. Okay. Basically, we're taking on a big project that Houston's already done, and that's your bus revamp. And that was a huge decision on the board's part. We've hired Jarrett Walker, who did your design. We know it's going to be a drama-filled thing to do, and but we believe it's necessary to improve our bus service, the quality, and to give our riders what they deserve to have, which is a efficient system that they can count on getting them where they need to go in a quick way. We're also building $2 billion rail projects. One of the projects is going to go from Plano and Collin County all the way over to DFW Airport and go through many, many cities on the way. It's a commuter rail project, basically, and we're building a subway in downtown Dallas. And so both of those, each one costs $1 billion, and so that's a huge investment of capital, and we're hoping to do both of them will add a lot to opportunities for our riders and future riders, quite frankly. So we're looking at that. We're really trying to re-envision who we are and what we are and how we deliver service. And that's a huge task also, which was kind of the umbrella task over all of the other things I just mentioned.
Great, thank you.
The future of transportation for us is that we finally have Metro next in Houston, which is something that we've been waiting for a long time. I think it's a twofold question for us. Obviously, we are a bus-based system. The future of transportation for the Houston region is going to be truly multimodal, because when I started in the consulting business, you very quickly learn the customer is always right, and that's what the customer wants. The customer wants multimodal options connecting our region's job centers, schools, universities, recreational facilities, medical centers, hospitals, so on and so forth. And if you want to continue to attract the talent that we need to attract, we need to have a quality of life that millennials want, because these things take time to build. We were talking right before we got on here, just because a bond passes doesn't mean you can go on Amazon and buy a bunch of trains and buses. I mean, these things take time to come to fruition. This is the very first step. And what we heard as part of the Metro Next conversation was, Metro Next is great, but how about Metro Now? So it's what can we do today in preparing for what the future may hold? You know, think about this. If we had this conversation 10 years back, none of us had this. Today, none of us can get around any part of anywhere we live or go without one of these. So we don't know exactly what the future holds. Autonomous vehicles, we are pilot testing those, but I believe those are first mile, last mile solutions. For everybody that believes that autonomous vehicles are going to somehow solve congestion, because the way we do development in Texas, once AVs become affordable, we'll go build a subdivision in Columbus or in Sealy, about 40 miles out of here. We'll get into the car, go to sleep, and say, take me downtown. That doesn't solve congestion. That puts more vehicles on the street. For us, it is about preserving corridors. Dallas obviously is ahead of the game. What the Northeast has is commuter rail. In Houston, we call it HOV lanes. we are preserving corridors where we can have bidirectional transportation options. What those will end up being, time will tell. Today, it's going to be a bus-based system. 10 years from now, maybe it's platooning buses. Maybe it's electronically connected buses where the first bus has a driver and the other buses just follow, essentially rail cars on rubber tires. But that's kind of the future we want to be ready for. Can we future-proof? I don't know about that. Can we be adaptable for the future? We certainly can. So it's about preserving those corridors and getting ready for what the future may bring.
So first of all, thank you for inviting someone from Dallas-Fort Worth to Houston, especially a Metropolitan Planning Organization person. And thank you for letting me join transit policy officials. Three things come to mind. One is the identification of needs, always trying to triage what is the best tool to solve that particular need. So we're going through what role technology plays in applying to that. You'll hear later on from the mayor of Austin, technology on its own is a waste of time. What role does technology play to solve needs? I think connecting, not just because this panel is sponsored by who it is, but connecting the fourth and fifth largest regions in the United States by high-speed trains, soon to be the third and fourth largest regions in the United States by high-speed trains, is a game changer. And there's other technologies. It's a game changer because in 54 years of high-speed rail service, there has not been a fatality on that mode of transportation. Testifying to the legislature last session, when you sit there and think of driving down on Interstate 45, in that time frame, you'll probably have 3,000 fatalities. So if we're the adults in the room, we need to, and this is about adults and having adult conversations, I really think we need to think about safety and some of these items and how technology can help us. I think the second is to remember transportation is a failure of land use. Transportation is a failure of land use. I've been in the transportation business 40 years in Texas as a public servant. I wake up every day responding to transportation problems that land use or the lack of good land use has created. So the chair and I are working on trying to get transit to a fast growth area in what's called the double iPod, the intermodal logistics hub in the southern sector of Dallas. They don't have access to transit. They're building a whole bunch of jobs, good paying jobs, can't get there. The ratio of housing to employment is the lowest I've ever seen in a 7-mile radius of that jurisdiction. Ms. Bauman and I wake up every day trying to develop innovative solutions to connect residents to employees. So I think we need to do a better job to reach out across our silos to local governments in integrating better land use transportation policy. And I hope to be invited one day to a housing panel. The last topic was, I thought, brilliant. But what role can transportation and housing together solve housing and transportation problems? And then the third is money. You cannot be in this transportation business without looking for ways for innovative funding. And I think in this state, transit policy board members have one arm tied behind their arm, and they're told, go solve all these needs, but remember all these propositions that we pass at the state, none of the funds are eligible for transit, like you're some sort of second or third tier policy initiative. So those of us at an MPO, we're constantly flexing our federal funds who don't have such biases in order to support the appropriate mode of transportation. But those are the first three that come to mind.
Great. And I think all of you raised pieces that I want to touch on as we go through here, but maybe, Michael, I'll pick up on that last question of funding. Sanjay, I know I've been having dreams of bus rapid transit opportunities and other things post-Metro next year. I'm sure you all and other board members are. And so maybe I'll start with you here on thinking about how we fund a broader system of transportation. It's not just one of the projects or another project, but how do we think about approaching the mix of local streets, highways, transit, bikes, and peds all together? You all just got $3.5 billion in bonds approved. What opportunities does that open? How do you guys think about leveraging that with federal funds? How do we approach state funds? What's next?
All of the above, because for the first time in a long time, we've got significant local funds to bring to the table. We're already working with our MPO, HGAC, in terms of what we've secured for universal accessibility, because as many millennials are moving in, it's also a recognition that our region's aging. So making sure that we make it safe, easy to access bus stops and transit stations, so on and so forth. We've secured some funding through HGAC. Those of you all that are in the Houston region, you all know that the east-west connectivity is something that we've been missing for a while. We've secured funding for the inner Katy corridor, where the HOV lane magically disappears inside Loop 610 and then magically reappears 3.5 miles later. It doesn't take a transportation expert. It takes my 7th grader to recognize what the heck happened. So we're going to finally make that connection. In terms of other options, you're right. We do have our hands tied behind our backs, because there is one thing that the future of transportation is not. It is not 94% highways. Because I've heard this from a couple of folks around the state, 94% of TxDOT's money can only be used in what we call freeways. By the way, there is no such thing. A friend of mine says there's no such thing called a freeway. There are only 2 kinds of roads. They're either toll roads or they're tax roads. Right? Freeways are not free. They cost money to build. And most freeways are congested, so they're not free to drive on either if you want to get someplace in a hurry. So it's looking at our district engineer here at TxDOT told us a definition of a good partner, which is what Metro wants to be, because it's going to take partners at the local, state, and federal level to make things happen. His definition of a good partner is a partner that brings money to the table. So what did we do on Metro Next? We took the 110 miles of HOV, which are now unidirectional, and we put in $1.2 billion to make them bidirectional, because that's what's changed. Our job centers are no longer just downtown. We've got probably 7 business districts. Millennials want to live in the urban core and then reverse commute to go to work. So it's a recognition of that. We now have brought some money to the table, hopefully, with Metro Next. There's the other thing that we do. How are we taking toll credits and how do we put that to use in the long run? Houston Metro has the general mobility program, where we take up to 25% of our 1-cent sales tax and we rebate it back to the member city, City of Houston, 14 smaller cities in Harris County. How do we make that count as local match dollars rather than just build stuff and not leverage federal funding that could potentially come with it? We've got a game changer in the region for the first time in a long time. We have a congressional delegation that wants to help us secure funding dollars. To my friends from Dallas, you all can thank us, because you all have been getting our share of federal matching funds for a couple of decades.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
We're always happy to help. Like we said, it's going to take partners to make all of this happen. And now we hope to be able to go back to Washington, D.C. and find matching funds to bring. So we can build the system out sooner rather than later.
And so obviously there needs to be a lot of sort of intercity, interagency learning. What are some of the things that Sanjay has mentioned? What has DART been working on in terms of funding? You mentioned $2 billion projects. How do you all approach it, and what do you think of as big opportunities going forward?
Well, for the very first time on the Silver Line, we're actually doing something a little bit different. Our money is coming from FRA, not from FTA. And what that means is we have taken out a very low interest loan. And we're really excited about it, because looking at our financial plan, DART does a 20-year financial plan. Our financial plan goes out 20 years, and I think we're the only one that does that. And it's really done well for us. It keeps us in line. It also looks at our potential. And by doing this low interest loan, we're able to finance completely the Silver Line. Now, credit also has to go to Michael Morris over here, because they have chipped in RTC funds, and the board has supported that. The cities along the way, with the exception and exclusion of Dallas, have all chipped in money. And so it's a real regional partnership to get the Silver Line built. So that was funded. We're looking at more traditional funding for the subway. The subway, we're looking at a large local match with our sales tax dollars, and then we have not given any of our sales tax dollars back. We have kept our sales tax dollars so far, but eventually we might when we're all operating and not building, that type of thing. So anyway, so that one we're looking more traditionally at us funding a certain percentage, and then going to FTA for a more traditional FTA type grant. So that's how we're funding the rail projects. And we have 13 cities in DART that pay sales tax. And as I think you and I were talking about before, some of our cities are big cities. Unlike Houston, who kind of took over the county as Houston, Dallas didn't do that. And so we are surrounded by powerful, wealthy suburbs. Not all of them, but Plano, Garland, Irving, they all have centers where they have corporate headquarters located. Toyota went to Plano. We have Exxon in Irving. So it's a great partnership that we have with them. And the suburban cities in our system put in 50% of our sales tax. Our Dallas puts in 50% of our sales tax. We have a board that's 8-7, with 8 from Dallas and 7 from the suburban cities. And that thing can flip at any time when the population flips. So it is a true partnership, and that's how, sales tax is our lifeblood. And I guess that's what the state of Texas thinks they give us, is the opportunity to do a sales tax, because we get zero funding from the state, as I'm sure you do too. So we have great partnerships with Trinity Metro in Fort Worth and with Denton County in Denton, and we have joint service that connects at various points along our system. So we really look at the whole DFW area as an extended service area for DART. And we have train connections coming in from Fort Worth that connect, and also from Denton County that connect into our station in Carrollton. So we are really trying to build and make those partnerships even stronger.
Great. And let's dig in for a moment, maybe, Michael, into the thing you discussed from the state level. What are some tweaks that the state could take to their approach to funding transportation that may open more opportunities, I think, beyond freeways?
So I think there's a range of sort of short range and long range strategies. I mean, longer range, you really need to think about transportation being funded with a gas tax, when every time you buy a new car, you pay probably 15-20% less gas tax. And of course, because of non-attainment and air quality and technology initiatives, we're supporting electric vehicles, but you can buy an expensive Tesla and not pay any user fee at all. So I think there's some longer-term public policy questions. I think one thing the state has done a terrific job of is transportation impacts the general economy. I mean, if you all go back to go back to school, some of you are in this school, and you are taught that transportation has economic multipliers of 2, 3, 4 times in the economy, and therefore, when we make transportation investments and hire bus drivers, they go to the dentist and buy blue jeans and have other multipliers in the economy. The good thing that Texas has done is fund transportation through general revenue. So a lot of us were born on this notion of a federal trust fund, and transportation has sort of been in its own jealous, dedicated funding source until the dedicated funding source doesn't pay for everything that you need. But the one thing in Proposition 1 and 7, those are general revenues, and they are going to transportation. I think because they're been done by voter referendum under a constitutional initiative, they'll be very hard to change. But just like in the previous panel, I think the number one issue in transportation is equity. I think it's critical that Houston gets its fair share, and rural Texas gets its fair share, and Dallas-Fort Worth gets its fair share. But the ticking time bomb of an $8 to $10 billion project is Interstate 35 in Austin. And our policy officials wake up every day fearful that even though we've done a good job keeping up using innovative funding in our region, someone may be jealous and take our fair share money and just move it to Austin. So I'm more and more looking at innovative ways for the state to bring back private sector partnerships. I mean, just think from Houston to Dallas, the HighSpeed Rail consortium of private sector money to build that. We have been blessed in Dallas-Fort Worth to have 2 public-private partnerships. When we were really, really poor, when Houston was taking all of our roadway money. I think these things aren't even true facts, but when you're in Houston, you of course have to say that. LBJ, if you've ever been on the LBJ toll managed lane, public sector, our office put in $400 million, private sector put in $3.5 billion. So when it comes to Austin's 35, why don't we hire a P3, build it for $8 billion, don't steal the money from across the whole state, and then those of us who go to Austin all the time, we're happy to pay our fair share, subsidize the use of that particular roadway by us paying our tolls on the toll managed lane, so the users of Austin don't have to pay all that fee, no different than staying in the hotel last night. I paid my fair share of a hotel tax to support the community's needs because I have an impact on the community's needs. So I think the adult conversation on innovative funding in the short term is to do a whole bunch of these really small things. The board member talked about transportation development credits. Transportation development credits is our federal government, again, acting in an innovative way. Hey, Texas, you've built tolled projects that could have used our federal gasoline money. We're going to credit you in kind for that. It's not real money, but I served on the rulemaking for transportation development credits, and our first priority is to put them to transit. So right off the top, all of the transportation development credits go to transit agencies, often the smaller ones who don't have enough local match to even go after the federal funds. So short range, lots of little things, making sure there's equity in what it is we do, not just across modes, but within the geography of the state. Don't steal money from rural areas to fund urban areas and so on and so forth. And then probably look closely at these midterm charges. Both House and Senate Transportation Committee are out getting reviews. All of you owe, if you're interested in transportation, you should weigh in on those charges because they're seeking input, and several of them are addressing the funding issue. Let me just give one quick innovative thing within our region. So on our toll express lanes, we don't charge transit vehicles to be on our toll express lanes. Different than your HOV system in Houston, ours are dynamically priced, so we can maintain speeds of 60, 70, 80 miles an hour on our express lanes. We are now piloting with our transportation authorities of what we call guaranteed transit. So we take a transit vehicle, put it in a dynamically priced toll managed lane, let's say LBJ to the airport or downtown Fort Worth to Alliance. If we don't get you to your destination on time, your transit fare is free. The transit agency doesn't have to pay the fare. The toll user on the toll managed lane will subsidize the transit user for that fare. Now, I must tell you, it's not a complicated question because we're managing the toll managed lane. We know for the last 426 days what the speed of that traffic was. Now, if something odd happens, we're more than happy to pay that transit user. But the notion of transit more and more, just like in roadway, is turning to reliability. I want my transit agency to be reliable. I like my bus driver. I like it when it comes on time. I like it when I can depend on getting to my class or work or whatever it wishes to be. No different in the roadway system. My board of directors' phones don't ring when the freeway's at 45 miles an hour, somewhat congested. It rings off the hook when they're stopped in their car, because they all have one of these now, and they call that policy official and said, I've been sitting here for 25 minutes. Nothing has happened. So those are the things that I think come closest to mind.
Well, and you mentioned equity, and you were obviously talking about it from a funding perspective, but I'm curious as well, similar to the housing conversation, we all have, as was mentioned, we all have an affordability limit, right? We all can access a certain amount of housing and a certain amount of opportunities, and I think that applies as well in transportation. There are folks who rely on transportation every day and are faced with currently, challenges of 2 or 3 hour commutes and multiple transfers. And there are folks who are maybe taking advantage of the HOV lanes you guys have talked about, and that's a very different experience. What are we doing now to think about those different experiences and bring that equity lens and equity question to how do we make a reliable, frequent system that works for that whole spectrum of users? What are you all doing in your work now? Maybe Sue, starting with you, how's DART approaching that challenge?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have 650 big buses going around, and we're totally re-envisioning how they work. Now, we have laid out a spine, and the spine is not movable. The spine is the rail system. And right now we have 93 miles of light rail, and we have 36 miles of commuter rail that are running on the street, or not in the street, they're running on tracks, thank you. But anyway, so we already have that infrastructure down. And what we're hoping to do with our, stepping back and looking at our bus re-envisioning, is how to leverage all of that. And we're very multimodal. We have streetcars, we have what I've just said, we have van pools and carpools, we have paratransit, and we have a new information system on our phones now that people can get their "Where's my bus?" and they can. It's a way they can load money onto their phone and where they can do their fare purchasing, and that technology helps speed everything up for them, and also they can. It's a fair system because when you buy a monthly pass, you buy it, for a certain amount of days. But this way, you put money on your phone, and then you use it when you need it, and it's stored. And so that's worked out really well. So we're really looking at a combination of technology, of re-looking at the planning of our bus system, looking at how we're not only going to integrate our streetcar system, but also we're looking at expanding our streetcar system, which is a whole different thing. And then I told you we have $2 billion projects right now laying more infrastructure, more spine onto the system. So we know that the horror stories we hear are when we hear from a person who says, it took me 3 hours to get to work. I had to transfer 4 times. And when you look at that within our region, we have a 900 square mile service area, which is big, but for our area it's big, even in Texas, but when you look at other parts, they would say 900 square miles, they think you're leaving their state. But, for us, it's nothing. But what it is a challenge. And it's trying to get people, I think Michael alluded to it, and so did you. People are started doing a reverse commute. We have a city full of millennials also. And I love it because Dallas has been transformed by that. And our downtown now is a very active, live place where it used to be after 5 o'clock, it was like a parking lot, a graveyard. Now it is vibrant. And so we have to meet their needs. We have to meet the needs of the commuters coming in from our cities going in or out, depending on what it is. And so I'm hoping that this bus re-envisioning, and we are looking at it not only from bus, but from a multimodal standpoint, that we'll come out with sort of stepping back and then looking at assets we have and then looking at challenges we have and coming up with ultimately, which is going to be a much improved experience for our riders.
Well, and that's actually maybe, Sanjay, could you, having done the bus reimagining here in Houston, what are some of the things that you all took into account? How did you approach that? And then maybe even piggybacking on to Metro Next, what are you seeing with this new funding pool that will allow you to augment that? Because I think Houston in this way is sort of an example, knowing that Dallas is going through this right now. What are some of the things you'd highlight for their transition?
I think we all talked about what's the customer looking for? Safe, reliable, frequent, multimodal options. That's the bottom line. Our reimagined bus system was August of 2015, so it's on year 4 now. And anytime New York City comes down to Houston, Texas to talk about how you redo your bus system and your transit system, we must be doing something right. So we've had folks come all the way from Auckland, New Zealand to come talk to us about Reimagined Bus System. But as you pointed out, you've got 900 square miles. We've got 1,300 square miles. I mean, that's about the size of the state of Rhode Island. Right? So I think that's how they measure property in West Texas. 2 RIs. My ranch is 2 Rhode Islands or something like that, right? So, which poses its own set of complications. When you go talk about whether it's done in an equitable manner, you look at what happened in Metro Next, you look at what happened in the Reimagined Bus System, making sure that every part of the service area has something. Now, there are folks that do not want local bus service. They want the park and ride service. There are others that want a lot more local bus service. Now, there are the usual concerns that you get about, this is why I don't want local bus service, because it might increase crime. And I keep asking this, and this may be controversial to say, but I'll say it anyway. First of all, I don't use local bus service because it is not frequent enough. But if you put it in there, it's going to increase crime. So I'm going to come to your house, steal your 42-inch TV, and go wait at the nearest bus stop as my getaway plan? I mean, I don't know how that computes. But you provide what the customer
And we
wants.
see a lot of people standing at the bus with a 42-inch TV screen.
You know, back in the day, it used to be a boombox. Now it's a TV that you carry with you, I guess. Anyway, you get the customer what they want. And in some parts of our service area, it's park and ride. In other parts, it's local bus service. When you put out a plan in front of the voters, the last time Metro had a referendum for bond, it passed by 52%. This couple of Tuesdays back, it passed with 68%. That's more than a 2/3 majority. In today's age, anything that can get 68% means you're doing something right. And I believe if you look at the plan, it's got something for everybody, every type of user. The person that relies on public transportation for absolute everyday needs, as well as somebody that's a choice rider. You know, when you can convince a high-powered lawyer that lives in River Oaks to park their 7 Series BMW and take the bus, it means it's convenient, it's safe, it's reliable, it's frequent enough for them. I think it's what Metro Next does is helps us build on that reimagined bus network. We went from a wheel and spokes to an east-west, north-south grid that recognizes that our job centers are a lot more spread out. What Metro Next allows us to do is to build on that by providing multiple other things that we need to. And when you have 1,300 square miles, can we get to everybody? It's going to be tough because our source of funding has not increased. We still rely on that 1-cent sales tax. This is a no tax increase plan that we put forward for the next 20 years that will give us $3.5 billion in bonding, complemented by federal, local, state matching funds of another $4 billion that gets us to $7.5, and then it continues that up to 1/4 of 1 cent that goes back to our member cities, because until we perfect Beam Me Up Scotty, we're always going to need roads and highways. This is not a rail or highway or a bus or highway. It's going to take all of us working together to get people moving around, because if you go back and look at things that are going well for us or have gone well for us, when the rest of the country was struggling economically, Texas continued to grow. Why? Because we chose to make those visionary investments back in the day in our highways, in our airports, in the case of Houston, the ship channel, securing water rights for the additional population. So we had a choice. When we say that you're going to add the population of Dallas, Austin, Corpus Christi, and San Antonio on top of ourselves, we had 2 choices. We could wring our hands and say, God, how much worse is congestion going to get? Or we can come up with a plan that works for everybody in the region that has safe, reliable, frequent, multimodal options. And that's what we're trying to get to.
Yeah, and I think, as you all have already mentioned, that tackling that requires a full system, right? And it's not isolated to one mode. It can't just be the highways. It can't just be transit. So I actually want to talk a little bit about how we think about prioritizing those types of, the creation of that system, right? And Michael, I want to start with you, because I think councils of governments, obviously, I think we were talking back in the green room, you have 13 counties and how many independent cities on representative?
We have 12 counties, approaching 9 million people, state of Maryland in land area and in population, can fit inside our metropolitan planning organization.
So when you're approaching that, and it's just probably similar numbers here at HGAC and other places around the state, when we talk about creating a transportation system, I think it's critical to think that's just as much for my neighborhood street. Like I should be able to walk and have my 5-year-old bike on my street safely and comfortably, and be able to get to my job and get to recreation, and so should everybody else in the community around me and in the city around me. But then we also have to think about a regional challenge, right? Whether it's $1 billion regional rail or the redesigning of the bus system. How do we approach connecting job centers, connecting population centers with the transportation needs of sort of the suburban edges? How do we approach prioritizing neighborhood level projects at the same time that we're trying to tackle
So I think
I-35?
it's a very good question, and I think it's a very fair question to a metropolitan planning organization, because we often, different than a state, different than a congressional office, different than a transit agency, we have the jurisdiction that sits on all of those. And of course, they're not aligned appropriately to our government structure. So we have cities, we have states, and we have nations. But transportation lays out, as you described. We have transportation issues at the neighborhood level. We have transportation issues at the regional level. And in places like Dallas-Fort Worth, that's not blessed to have access to the sea. We have a very sophisticated international logistics system. So we operate at 3 planes, PLANES. We operate at 3 levels simultaneously. I think if the pendulum ever gets too neighborhood-ish, I think Austin does over the decades from time to time go that way. It hurts the regional mobility picture, and it hurts their international logistics. If you move too far into the business world of international logistics, you're going to lose your cities and your neighborhoods. So my job is to make sure everyone is equally dissatisfied. We have programs at all 3 levels going on at the same time, but you would never see it reading a newspaper. You would see, oh, the North Central Texas Council of Governments Regional Transportation Council funded neighborhood sidewalks to help support Uber to get to Farmers Market in Dallas, in the same agenda item where we're giving $100 million in congestion mitigation air quality funds to Dallas area rapid transit in order to build a regional rail line, in the same agenda item that we may be implementing autonomous technology funds to do lifts at a UP or Burlington Northern intermodal facility to try to get first mile from a intermodal hub through autonomous transportation, so they don't lift it onto a truck. Truck goes through a gate, goes to another truck, goes to a warehouse. Every movement or lift in the logistics chain is a horribly expensive, inefficient component. So I think one thing that has helped, for years the state has argued against performance metrics from the federal government. In fact, 15 years ago they sued the federal government. You can't develop performance measures on productivity and single occupant vehicles and safety because after all, in the Federalist Papers, we are a United States and you get your authority from us. And I think states on their own after that developed a very strong set of performance metrics. So this last time, the states, since they were in the performance measure business, and I think data, information, quality data and information drives performance measures, which drives this thinking of 3 levels simultaneously, which drives, we did a study, why can't we get more transit ridership? One of the reasons is we have inadequate sidewalks to rail stations. Mm-hmm. And that's not the transit agency's issue. That gets back to my issue I said earlier, a failure between transportation and land use. Mm-hmm. That, hey, if I was a Transportation Authority board member, I'd probably say, you want our rail station, City X? Here's our three things that we're asking from you. We need a ubiquitous network of sidewalks. We need assistance with regard to policing to and from the station. We'll take it at this particular place. And oh, by the way, if you develop some pretty aggressive, even non-aggressive, pretty innovative land use development interest around the freaking station, it would help us gain ridership at that particular location. And then those of us who are funding transportation throughout all of these levels, maybe it would be okay to spend less money in really far away places so we can spend more money in really close places to infill the centers of our regions, reducing the length of these trips that transportation wakes up and faces all the time.
So I'd love to expand on that for our last question, sort of for everybody, what is happening around the connections of land use and housing? How do transit agencies in particular, how are you guys engaging with that? And then Michael, if you have other thoughts on expanding on that as well, but I'd love, maybe Sanjay, can you start with what is happening in Houston and how Metro has started with TOD? Oh, sorry, transit-oriented development and other.
So I'm really glad you brought that up. So we don't have
You're
as
welcome,
much
sir.
rail as Dallas has. So where does it make sense for us to have the same parking requirements for development within a quarter-mile walking distance from a rail station or a transit center or a park and ride facility as you would in a suburb that doesn't have any public transportation? Because if you made the investment, you let it go as far as it possibly can. And I think for the first time in a while, just a few months back, Houston's adopted parking regulations along transit corridors. Then the next thing that you look at...
Lowering the requirement.
Lowering the requirement, exactly. If we go back to our previous conversation on housing, right? We built affordable housing, we built workforce housing, we built it so far away from town that now you've got affordable housing, but you now have to have 2 cars and pay insurance and pay $400 a month on gas. That's really not affordable. That's not solving anything. You just moved it from one expenditure to a different expenditure. It's looking at all of our existing assets that we have within our system and seeing how we can promote development that brings jobs, workforce housing, education centers, parks, as well as the business side of things near there, rather than always saying you have to originate on the extreme ends and then drive someplace else to get to what you need to do. You had also asked about how do we prioritize stuff. To us, it's got to be increasing ridership, improving the customer experience, and getting bang for the buck. Bang for the buck as in not making money. To us, bang for the buck is increased ridership. Because public transportation is not going to be for everybody, especially when you have a 1,300 square mile service area. You can't get to all corners easily, unless we have a bottomless barrel of money, which we don't. So at that point in time, I lost my train of thought why I brought this up. If you can't get to every part of town, you've got to find ways to get folks quicker to where they're trying to get to. If we can help with doing that, we've done our job. There have been folks that have asked us, why couldn't the bond program in Houston be bigger? You know, well, Los Angeles did several, almost 100+ billion.
Yeah.
Seattle did 50-something billion. This is about us being fiscally prudent. All of our member jurisdictions have already hit that cap. There is no way for them to afford any more. And those plans are all a 40-year plan. Ours is 20 years, and it's about $12 billion in investment without any tax increase. Plus, we live in Texas. We're not California. We're not Washington State. So it's recognizing the political demographics that we have and seeing how much we can do with what we can afford today.
Sue, can we end with you on that same question of what is DART doing and how is it approaching housing? And as you're answering, if folks want to start lining up for questions, we'll have the same Q&A approach, but I'll let you finish up there and then we'll go to the questions.
Well, DART has always been very aggressive on transit-oriented development. And we have a lot of them already on the ground in various suburban areas as well as in Dallas itself. We have 2 brand new projects. One is going to be at our Mockingbird station on the light rail line. It's with Trammell Crow, and they're building a multi-use development, retail, office housing. We have one in Carrollton that's going on to that line, anticipating the Cotton Belt, as well as connections with Denton County. When you look at our workforce housing, affordable housing, whatever you want to call it, we're kind of getting into this new right now. The city of Dallas just passed a housing analysis of workforce housing. We are doing the same thing. We're looking at opportunity zones along the rail line. Not every part of our rail line is really somewhere that is a good idea for that. And we have an interesting situation where while Dallas is more or less embracing that idea, our suburban cities are not. They are not embracing it. And so they pay 50% of our taxes too. And so we're talking about the political reality. We're walking this line, and we're hoping to have successes in the Dallas part that will encourage our suburban part to be more aggressive. But we have to show success. We have to show it works. And unfortunately, and as I talked, I'm a native Dallasite, and as I talk to my friends, they look at it, when you say the word affordable housing, they say projects. They think of it in terms of projects. You're going to put a project into my neighborhood. And so I'm, from my former marketing background, I think for it to really be something that works in our area, we have to rebrand it. They have to understand what we're talking about is let's keep our middle class in our cities. Let's don't become Manhattan. Let's go on and make sure that our police and our teachers and our firefighters can afford to live in the inner city in Dallas. They don't have to go out to Duncanville and way out to do that. But that's not what the general population thinks we're talking about. They honestly think we're putting in projects. And so our cities are getting pushback from their own inhabitants. And it's even worse in the suburbs because they don't even want apartments. Some of our cities have, our large suburban cities out in our service area, they put a kibosh on building more apartments. And they don't care if they're luxury apartments. They don't want them. So we're fighting a reality and a necessity that's pushing back against both misinformation, people not understanding what this is, as well as political pushback that they don't want it. They may want the rail, and most of them want rail more than bus, but they don't want affordable housing in certain areas. So that's what we're up against.
Great. Thanks, Sue. And as Michael said, I think it's clear, especially the last two panels, housing and transportation, obviously very closely connected. So thank you guys for bringing that up, and let's open it to questions here. And this microphone works too, so we don't all have to have on the left side. But we'll start here.
Without bringing the sponsor in to answer this question, what are the obstacles currently to the Central Texas Rail Line, and how are the two cities or the two metros going to accommodate or integrate with Central Texas Rail Line? But please answer the first one first, unless I should just go outside and ask them that question.
No, there's three elements, and I think we're 438 days away from the legislative session.
But who's counting?
I risked my PE license and my government service last session, and I have pleaded with them that I think if you go back to legislative session one more time, your project will be eliminated. There are three elements. One is a finding of no significant impact, which is the environmental clearance. It is scheduled to be completed by the spring. A record of decision for that project to proceed. Because they are the first implementer of service in the United States, and this is true of anything, any new transportation mode, you have to develop your safety protocol for this new mode of transportation called grade separated high-speed rail. That too is scheduled for the spring. And then the third is this ability to enter in Texas people's property, and to do so they must have some ability to be, quote, a railroad. So 2-3 weeks ago, we were all writing letters of support to the Surface Transportation Board to get that indication. It's a nuance because your utility companies in this state can access your property as they work on power lines and other things. I think first and last mile is critical, and I know where they end up in Houston, near downtown, is not as close as in Dallas. We worked hard to get them in downtown. We have an integrated partnership with DART and the city of Dallas. to look at how do we integrate land use, first and last mile, technology companies, the light rail system, the regional rail system, whole new land use fabric around what will be the equivalent of a DFW International Airport in our downtown. So we're on our third level of a sequence of 7 levels of design. First locating the station, second to ensure that it can go all the way to Fort Worth. Third, how do we then start to work with our transportation partners creating an intermodal hub, including do we make adjustments to the light rail line? At some point, regional rail can only go, high-speed rail can only go so far. It's easier to take the light rail and the other more flexible modes to it, and that's the process we're going through in our region.
Thanks, Michael.
So, how you guys doing? Good afternoon, I think it is. I have 2 questions. One's more loaded than the other. I'll start with the easy one concerning equity. I know bikes haven't really been mentioned much, but I know you guys are working on that in some sort of way, like right now, especially with Metro building bike lanes around near Northside and whatnot. So my question about that is, how are you guys using implementations of bike lanes in other cities to improve on their mistakes and how to prevent any issues with that? Because like New York right now is going through a really big deal of finding or holding drivers accountable for the crashes that occur with cyclists in the bike lanes.
Vision Zero, whether it be for TxDOT or for bike or pedestrians, safety, safety, safety has to be on top of, every time we see something on the news about a plane crash, we all get really worked up. I think there's a statistic that says we kill about 80 plane loads of people on our roads and bike trails on an annual basis. We've got to really start thinking about how we design them and make people more aware. I ride bikes on weekends, and I ride bikes on streets where there are no bike lanes. So my wife thinks I'm really crazy.
I think you're crazy.
I do too. That's why I ride on the
That's what
weekends
we need
real
to
early in the
change.
morning. But getting back to the question, it's about finding, we've got to find ways to build safe bike infrastructure. We are working with B-Cycle, where we're bringing some money to the table to have, because at the end of the day, like I think we talked about this earlier, right? If using your bike to get to a transit center or a park and ride is a real option, it's not about convincing all 100% of our car drivers to use transit. Mm-hmm. If 3% use it a different mode to get to where they need to get to, it'll make the life so much simpler for the other 97% that want to drive 5 miles faster. So we are trying to learn from other cities. Metro finally made an investment in bringing an urban planner and a designer in-house, so we can start thinking about how we make our transit locations more attractive for people to use. And that ties back to how you do transit-oriented development. Make it a destination rather than you only go there when you need to get to work and go back home. It's a thought process shift that needs to happen.
Great, awesome.
Can I bounce over here for a question and then come back for a second?
Okay. Dr. Shelton, thank you, and esteemed panelists, thank you for the great thoughts. I have 2 questions primarily. The first one is a comment. Transportation is my first love. I ended up in housing because housing and transportation, but I love transportation.
You should come over to the cool side.
They all want me.
But by the way, you did a very good job on the housing side.
I appreciate you. I'm going to ask you something in a second. So I know all of this is very engineering flavored, and so we talked about equity, which we know in transportation is more a funding concept, and we talked about reliability, frequency, and how about affordability? Because I know that in engineering, everything tends to be structure based and or system based, but not so much people based. And so I'd like to pick your brain on how you include affordability pressures in your day-to-day activities. And just for the background, as it comes to voucher holders, coincidentally, my dissertation was on transportation equity for voucher holders. And I actually engineered a residual income approach. So looking into after people pay for housing, childcare, food, do they have enough to pay for transportation? And what I have found is that they don't, like 75% of them don't have the monetary funds to actually pay for private transportation. And same thing for a monthly regional pass. At the time of my dissertation, the price of a DART pass was $160. I just went on a website, it's now $192. So I'm just want to see how transportation affordability is taken into account when pricing fare tickets?
Well, let me give a quick example. First of all, I think you're right. This is why I think transportation should overlap with social issues. I'm going to date myself. I think public transit is the Rodney Dangerfield of transportation, because these board members don't get any respect because they have to do everything. Our rail system was built on the energy crisis in the 70s, where the private sector said, we're going to have an electric system to create a redundant capacity to get employees to work. In the same board of directors, in the same public policy discussion, we hear social workers getting vouchers through the social program, not through the transportation program, having a Sophie's choice. Do I give this transit pass to a person getting a job, a person to visit their doctor? I only have 10 passes today. I'm going to see 40 citizens. That is unacceptable. We went to our board, the MPO board. Sue was on our board at the time, and I said, I want $1 million in transit passes to create some way to leverage with the private sector in order to create a sustainability of a program over time. Because I think in our society, social workers should not be faced with that equity choice of, you know what, you don't get to have that interview today, or you don't get to see the doctor as part of that program. So I think the more recent example is we did a pilot where in the Tarrant County Community College, 100% of their transit cost is paid. We're funding that through the Regional Transportation Council. We're doing it as a pilot. We want to see how many trips are made from the transit pass unrelated to school. Because what we're hearing from maybe University of Houston students as well, there's a $300, $400, $500 cash flow that a student may have just to be able to stay in school. And if you can develop a transit pass as part of that particular program, when you look at the fare block subsidies of transit agencies, I don't think you can expect them to lower their price if you look at that as a sustainable model. I think it's up to others of us as we get outside of our silos on how we can cross-subsidize transportation investment to meet the equity issues that our community is seeking. I think it's our responsibility. We need to have more conferences where the transportation people sit on the same panel as the housing people so we can have this conversation. Thank God you stayed one more panel.
We live in the same
Thank God
city.
you stayed for the cool people.
Sanjay, I think you had a thought, and then we're going to unfortunately have to pause in there. But Sanjay.
So, yes, engineers think linear, but here are two things I would say. $1.25 is what it costs on Houston Metro, probably one of the cheapest fares anywhere in the country. Second, when you talk about affordability, if you ride 20 miles on the bus, it's $1.25, but until about 2.5 years back, if you rode the bus to the neighborhood Kroger or Walmart, it was $1.25, it was another $1.25 to come back. That's a choice that folks have to make. So little
Or
things make a
sacrifice.
difference. So what we did was we said, if you buy a $1.25 pass, it's valid for 3 hours. Doesn't matter how many directions you go, right? That has a significant, it may sound really small, but has a significant impact on somebody that's on a fixed budget. Right? The other is getting folks used to the habit of riding. We made 50% off for all K through 12 and college kids in the Houston region on Metro. 3 years back, pushed for free bus rides for K through 12 and college kids during the summer, because if you get folks used to the idea of using public transit when they're 15, they'll probably ride it at my age. So it's behavioral changes that we need to make early so we can have a better future down the road where we're all not sitting in our cars 4 hours a day, not getting anywhere, any place fast.
All right. Well, thank you. I think if you all can, I'm sure they'll still want to answer your questions. Apologies that we're running out of time, but can you please join me in thanking the panelists? And I think Evan has the most important announcement.
What a wonderful panel. Please give Kyle and our panelists a hand again. That was great.